You have a framework for decision making. It helps to actually have a way of going about thinking about things so that when you're confronted with uncertainty and change, you can actually learn how to be calm, adapt, think about first principles, and move forward with confidence because you have a process in place. We'll be talking about that this week. This is Make Better Wealth Decisions, a podcast about financial blind spots, decision making, and how the reality of higher rates, global tensions, and tariff instability impact your investments. I'm your host, John DeGuy, a portfolio manager with Design Securities in Toronto. This week, we're speaking with Sam Sivarajan. Sam is a keynote speaker, a consultant, a podcaster, an author, and a behavioral scientist. We're going to be speaking to him primarily about his new book, The Uncertainty Edge. Sam, how are you today?
John, very good. Thanks for having me.
Always a pleasure. You are one of only a handful of people who I've actually had back on more than one occasion. And that just means you're a fount of knowledge and the sort of person who can't get all the things said that need to be said in just one episode. So we have to have you back.
Well, thank you.
Let's talk about your book, The Uncertainty Edge. You open the book with a moment of real life chaos during the pandemic, things that happened in 2020, trying to get your family home from Portugal. That idea helps to catalyze certain core ideas. And can you maybe walk us through how that was the spark for The Uncertainty Edge, and maybe even just take a moment to explain exactly what The Uncertainty Edge is?
Yeah, so let me start with maybe telling that story. And I think most of your listeners can relate. Before we had gotten to Portugal, we are actually thinking about whether should we go on this trip or not. But the information wasn't clear. We had gone. One day into getting to Portugal, I was getting alerts on my phone that our flights were canceled, that we should make other way home, etc. So we literally spent 24 hours navigating internet, travel agencies, et cetera, to find a different flight back home. And I think what really twigged my interest at that stage is if you're going through the airport, you saw two different types of people. Ones who were completely panicky, not reacting with panic and not thinking through things, and others that were taking it in stride, saying what is in their control and what isn't. And that was really I think the catalyst, as you put it, for The Uncertainty Edge, because I'd seen this in the business world, I'd seen it in our personal world. And the book is really about, in my mind, what we are dealing with as a society right now. The more complex, the more interconnected our world is, the more that we're facing uncertainty. And to me, dealing with uncertainty is very, very different than dealing with risk. And we can come on to that. I think you need a playbook, you need tools and frameworks to think about how do we deal with this world when we don't know what the path forward is.
And you've used a number of quotes about how people who are able to deal with uncertainty, how that's a sign of intelligence, and a lot of what I did. I know when I was in graduate school, there was a book that we dealt with from an academic named Rosemary Stewart, talking about your circle of influence and your circle of concern. And one of the distinctions you make all the time is focus on what you can control, and you can be concerned about certain things. But when you talk about making wealth decisions and better wealth decisions, don't be too caught up about things that you really can't control anyway. What can you control? Focus on that and see if you can get that done properly. And then the chips will fall where they fall. And if you're adaptable enough, you should be able to meet the moment and be able to deal with it. So one of the most powerful ideas that you have in the book is that people often confuse the concept of risk with uncertainty. And a lot of people use those two terms interchangeably. Maybe walk us through, what would you say are the primary distinctions between risk and uncertainty?
Yeah, I think especially in a portfolio context, an investment context, I think we do use those terms interchangeably. Risk is really something that you can model and that you can map out scenarios that you can then create alternatives or hedges, if you will, on it. So classic example is in portfolios, you're deciding how you're going to hedge it depending on what might transpire. A chess game, as complicated as chess is, it is an example of risk. You can actually map out any number of different moves and think about what the counter move to that could be. Uncertainty, even though we use the term interchangeably, is the polar opposite. The pandemic is a great example. These are scenarios that you really can't even contemplate, much less think about how you will respond to it in the moment. And I think the more interconnected and complex the world gets, more and more uncertainty exists. There's during, I think it was in 2020, we had the massive container ship that blocked the Suez Canal. It basically brought global trade to a halt, and I think it was costing something in the order of a few $billions of trade every day.
Yeah.
And that was a part of the supply chain problems causing inflation, et cetera. Nobody had forecast something like that happening or how to respond to it. That's uncertainty.
Bringing it back to finance, I think about how many years ago, maybe 25 years ago, I was learning about the way regulators will model portfolios and the way they will depict things. And there's a semi-variance versus a regular variance model.
Right.
So they will talk about things being risky. And again, this is exactly to your point, how a lot of people use the terms synonymously. But if there's a 40% variance that your expected return is going to be 5%, but it can be anywhere as high as plus 25 to negative 15, and there's a 40% variance, that's uncertainty because you don't know where you're going to land within that. But the risk is it really risky to be up 25%? That's uncertainty, but that's not risk. That's just, the real risk is just on the downside. It's not risky to be on the other side of the normal distribution of what the universe of possible outcomes might actually be. But people don't think with that.
That's topic for another podcast episode, but you're right. Like I think the way that we use risk in investment portfolios is completely wrong. My doctoral thesis, when I asked actual investors how they think about risk, everybody would agree with you. Nobody would nobody would think of making money on the upside as being risky. Right. Nobody would think the volatility, which is how we define risk in the industry, as being risk, how the average investor, sophisticated average investor, thinks about risk is losing money, right? But volatility isn't losing money.
So in your book, you talk about goal fixation and how it can backfire. So maybe we can walk through that. I know you've talked about being a mountain climber and people that are unduly fixated on trying to reach the summit. Talk about that.
Yeah, I think the goal fixation exists in real life. It exists in portfolios. It exists in the business world. So let me talk about each of those in turn. The classic example of the story I talk about is Everest 1996. 30 mountain climbers, professional mountain climbers who had spent months on the mountain, were ready to make their summit attempt. And for listeners, Everest is about a 2 to 3 month odyssey that you have to be on the mountain in terms of preparing and acclimatizing and everything else. But these professional climbers were ready. They were in the last day or two of going towards the summit, and there was a storm warning of a massive storm coming in for Everest, et cetera. Now, these climbers they had so much invested in time, effort, goals, et cetera, that most of them didn't turn back. They kept going. The storm hit, and what happened is that 8 out of those 30 climbers actually lost their lives on Everest. I mean, there's been stories and films and all about it. This is what goal fixation is. They were so focused on their goal, on their summit, that they weren't ready to adapt under the circumstances. Now, we see this in the corporate world. Boeing, over the last 10 years or 15 years, had suffered enormous setbacks with their 737 MAX crashes. 346 people died over those 2 crashes, et cetera. But if you dig deeper, what it was Boeing was so focused on cutting costs and getting the 737 MAX out on time, i.e. fixated on their goal, that they ignored all the warnings that they were getting from their engineers and others that there was problems with the software on the 737 MAX. So I think, and we get this in our world, John. I mean, investors get focused on getting an X% return, no matter what the market.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
and that becomes, again, the key is you can have goals. So I always say stay focused on your goals, but flexible on your approach.
Good. That's a great way to put it. So let's talk about the uncertainty edge. Edge is an acronym, and I like acronyms because I've used acronyms in stand up. So your edge framework is establish, diagnose, go, and evolve, four sequential steps. And the book is filled with practical tools that you can use in checklists. Perhaps you could take a moment now to walk us through what edge is and how it might be applied as you go about making better decisions in general, but hopefully wealth decisions in particular.
So EDGE stands for, as you say, it's an acronym. The first E is for establishing your foundation. It's what you do when in times of quiet. So in wealth context, it might be setting your portfolio foundations. So it really is identifying what is it that you can control and don't control, aligning your actions with your priorities, making sure that you're spanning the short term and the long term, because we always have multiple time periods that we're trying to solve for. And then finally, it's to make sure that you're tracking the right metrics on your progress. So that's what I would call establish your foundation. Once you've got those foundation in place, you're ready to deal with uncertainty as it arises. So the three steps that allow you to dynamically adapt to your environment are diagnose, so which means to see the situation objectively. Don't panic. So for example, in Portugal in March 2020, I had to look at the situation objectively and not panic. What is really happening? What is not? Go means moving forward without panic, but with purpose. So you're actually thinking through your different scenarios and executing to say, if I do A, what's likely going to happen? And there are tools to kind of map these kind of things out before you're actually executing. And the last step is the second E, which is evolve. And the principal idea here is, as I like to put it, it's Mike Tyson's famous quote that everybody has a plan until they get punched in the mouth. And so in life, we are going to get punched in the mouth. It doesn't mean that we don't plan, whether it's in your investment portfolio or not. But the key is to have all of these other pieces in place so that when life does throw a punch in your mouth, that you're ready to kind of evolve, and while you're still staying focused on your goals, but flexible on your approach.
So one of the things I love about your writing is that you're very good at bringing the points home by talking about your personal experience. You draw on your own life, your legal career, investment banking, endurance challenges as you climb, and how you have to embrace uncertainty along the way and adapt your planning. Could I ask you to tell me a story about how you learned something, what something taught you about your own resilience and your own adaptability? Because you seem to be a treasure trove of stories of how these things might apply to ordinary people's lives.
Well, I think this is all experience, right? So look, I mean, I will tell a very personal story. So look, I was a corporate lawyer in Canada. I was an investment banker in the UK. I came back to build wealth management firms in Canada. And about 20 years ago, I found myself suddenly being walked out the door along with 5 other people, senior executives at the firm that I was in. It wasn't anything I had done. It was just a sign of the times, but that's about as uncertain as I had ever expected. Until that point, I had changed career, I had made moves, but it was always my choice, based on my decisions, etc. This was something where uncertainty happened to me. And again, I think that was a very poignant lesson, but a very important lesson for me, that uncertainty is always a factor. And we have to be, the only thing that is in your control is assessing the situation objectively and deciding how you're going to respond to that new situation. And I learned that firsthand there, but that's the one of many lessons that I've learned firsthand about how you have to adapt.
So let's talk about the great uncertainty of our times, which is artificial intelligence. There are so many people in all walks of life who feel uncertain because of what AI might mean and how it might affect their career, their own ability to adapt. I'm old enough that I've actually resisted using AI. I use it a little bit, but not much. I've made a personal commitment to use it better. I really this was a 2025 commitment that I'm now hunting to make it my resolution for 2026. But it's like it's just human nature that if you find it a bit intimidating, you put it off. You can only put things off for so long before it shows you that you absolutely positively need to deal with it. And I think that's where a lot of people are with regard to artificial intelligence. Can you maybe provide an anecdote or a rule of thumb in terms of the way we should be looking at using AI in our own lives, or maybe a story?
So I think there's a couple of ways I would tackle it. So look, I think AI, I do believe there is a value in it. I think we have to make sure that it isn't replacing our thinking ability. So the one story I always use is GPS. GPS is a form of technology, and I think it's a very valuable technology. But people become over reliant on it. Every year, you read stories about people following their GPS directions into a riverbed or using seasonal roads, and sometimes with tragic consequences. And so the idea is not that technology is bad. The idea is to completely allow it to substitute for our own human judgment and experience that we've developed over time. Now, the specific thing I'm concerned about and where uncertainty comes in, I think, especially from an investor perspective, is that a bubble market that we're in right now. And so one example that we can talk about, and is very, very happening as we speak, is that, there's a rush to kind of build out data centers. But I've just read a report, I'm sure you've seen it, that IBM CEO has just admitted that the math doesn't work. So a single gigawatt AI data center costs about $80 billion to build. So big tech is talking about building about 100 of them. So that's a cost of about $8 trillion, which means that you need to generate about $800 billion in annual profits just to cover the interest on that expenditure. There's no company on earth that generates that. And to add to that, this hardware becomes obsolete about every 5 years. So you're going to have to rebuild it entirely over and over again. OpenAI is burning twice what it earns, and with no foreseeable path to profit, et cetera. This is goal fixation, as we talked about, at scale. I think so. We're watching, as we talked about what Boeing did, we're watching the entire tech industry do the same thing. They're locking onto artificial general intelligence as the destination, ignoring the economics of the journey. And I think what we have to understand is this got life, or is it doesn't have life? And I think we're coming back to the edge framework. I think that we can learn that we've seen bubbles before. The uncertainty isn't the threat. We don't know how AI is going to play out, but how we choose to respond or how we choose to prepare for it, I think, is within our control. And I think that's to me, it is something that I worry about, to sit there and think is, if AI is a bubble, the knock-on effects that are going to be on the economy, never mind on individual portfolios, et cetera. It's not going to be confined to the Magnificent Seven. It's not going to be confined to the tech sector. It's going to be broader than that.
So you've mentioned in the book that you say the book is largely for people who are in transition, who are able to adapt to change and think about how they should be doing as the ebbs of the economy and of their careers rise and fall. What would you say makes the biggest difference in helping people to navigate those changes and being adaptable so that they have the edge that's needed to make better decisions as they navigate the world?
I think part of it is to accept the fact that change is a constant, right? There is, as Benjamin Franklin said, there is nothing certain in life except death and taxes. And I think that is becoming truer and truer every day that passes on. So the book is talking about transformation, but it's about making decisions when you're coming at crossroads, whether it's on leading an organization or whether it's leading yourself. And I think from a personal transformation point of view, I think you have to think about your role as separate from your core self. And the example I give in the book is about Steve Jobs, the founder of Apple, who was unceremoniously dumped from the company that he had founded. And to his credit, he reinvented himself and he came back even bigger and stronger. But he says it in his famous Stanford speech that he had to go back to being a beginner again. So it wasn't that he didn't define himself as a failed CEO. He defined himself as a technologist that got an opportunity to reinvent technology one more time.
Wow.
I think the alternative is that you decide that you're going to retreat and you're going to stay very, very focused. So this is the goal fixation that we've talked about. It is the sunk cost fallacy that you think I've put so much time and effort into what I'm doing, whether it's in a career, whether it's an initiative that I'm running for a company, et cetera, that you're not able to move past and adapt. I think fundamentally there's a mindset that looks at, okay, what is done is done. What is out of my control is out of my control. What is it in the situation that I see facing me? What is it that is within my control? What steps can I take? What small experiments can I run to see, whether this is going to win and this is going to be the right path forward?
Okay, we only have time for a couple more questions. And what you just said, I think, is a great segue to one of the things that you talk about at the end of the book is the legacy question, which is, what will when I'm no longer here, what will my difference have been? What difference will I have made? Maybe take a moment to walk us through what you see as being the legacy question and the considerations that go into it.
I think for a lot of us, I think and it's becoming more clear as I get older. I think it's not in just what we do, it's how we do it. And I think in bringing it back to the wealth management context, it's process versus outcomes. I think anyone can make a lucky investment. Warren Buffett is a successful investor not because he gets every investment, but because he's got a process that allows him to get more investments right than wrong. And that's what you try to do for your clients, John. That's what I tried to do in my wealth management world. And I think coming to the legacy question, I think we all should have a process on how we approach decisions, et cetera, how we think about things. So it's not about getting each decision right. It's about the process that we go through to think, okay, what are the values is this aligned with my values? Is this aligned with my longer term objective? Am I thinking through the impact on all the stakeholders that I care about? Am I playing out, one of my favorite things is this idea of the second order thinking, right? It's not enough to say, if I do X, okay, I think Y will happen. I think you have to go one step further to say, if I do X, then Y might happen. But if Y happens, then A, B, and C could also follow. So I think that, to me, is the idea of legacy thinking, is to say, to start with the fundamentals as, what kind of life do you want to live and what kind of lessons do you want to leave behind, or legacy do you want to leave behind? But then think through that process as to, how does that dictate how you're going to approach decisions, how you're going to approach others, how you're going to approach life in general.
That's lovely. So let's see if we can end the way I always like to end, which is, podcast is called Make Better Wealth Decisions. If it was up to you, Sam, what advice would you give people to help them make better wealth decisions?
I think it's critical to get your foundations in place. So this is to go back to the edge, to get your foundation in place, to make sure you are clear on what is it that you can control and not control. And I think in better wealth decisions, as you tell your clients, you don't have to worry about what the Bank of Canada does or the US Fed does, et cetera. That's out of your control. I think it's the small decisions that you make that are going to make the biggest difference in your long-term outcome. So are you saving properly? Are you diversifying properly? Are you playing the long game? All of those things, I think, matter way more than worrying about whether AI is going to be there or not. I think it will dictate how you do it. If you've decided that you're going to put all of your wealth into one or two AI stocks, I mean, that's probably not going to bode well for you in the long run. But you don't have to worry if you've got a properly diversified portfolio with the long-term time horizon, et cetera, where you're able to manage your behavioral biases either on your own or with the help of an advisor. I think these are the foundational blocks to building your wealth better.
Great. Thank you so much, Sam. It's been a real pleasure speaking with you. I want to wish you all the best of luck and all the best for the new book.
Thank you, John. Happy holidays.
This podcast is not to be construed as offering specific investment advice. Please consult a qualified advisor before acting. My books, Stand Up to the Financial Services Industry and Bullshift, are available online. If you'd like to meet to discuss how the topics in this podcast affect you directly, please visit my website.